Hello everybody, good morning. Welcome to my humble home here on the homestead. So I had an interesting and educational day yesterday regarding computers, and maybe some of you old school tech guys might appreciate this. Windows 10 is now officially my favorite operating system, and I'll tell you why. Some people really hate Windows 10, but here's this cool thing. Like I've been using Windows for a long time, since back in the day, since Windows 3.1, okay? Early 90s, I've seen it develop all through the different operating systems, and I've pretty much used every single operating system right on up to Windows 10, except I did skip Windows 8 for the most part. I just thought Windows 7 was better than Windows 8, so I just didn't ever really use it if I didn't have to. Some computers I used had it, and I just dealt with it, but 7 until Windows 10 came out. Ow. Darn dog. Popped my ankle. Anyway, so, I get a lot of, I work on computers, and I get a lot of people telling me that they really just like Windows 7, and as you probably know, that Microsoft recently ended support on Windows 7. So what do? You can still use Windows 7, but you're not going to get any more security updates or any virus protection. So it's a good idea to upgrade. The problem is a lot of computers that are running Windows 7 just can't really handle the requirements of Windows 10. It requires beefier hardware to run Windows 10. Unless you have the linked power state technology where it can share resources, like for example, your dynamic page file can be used as RAM, and RAM can be used to store other stuff, and it kind of goes back and forth. So what I've seen over the years is more of a trend towards really low power machines, low energy processors, light integrated RAM, and a lot of actually integrated motherboards that have the solid state drive, the memory, and the CPU burned right into the board. It's just one board. You can't upgrade it without, soldering new chips into it. And I see a lot of those, but when you look at the specs, it's kind of surprising to learn that they're running Windows 10 with maybe 2 gigabytes of RAM and maybe a 30 or a 40 gigabyte solid state drive, and maybe a 2-core Atom Intel processor or something like that. So I see a lot of those in all-in-ones and laptops, and they seem to do okay with Windows 10. Out of the box, they run fine, but as soon as you do an update, typically they run out of hard drive space pretty quick, which if you're using, all the resources that are designed with the motherboard, it can't function correct because it needs a certain amount of hard drive space for page file, which is a pretty dynamic file and can get quite large as it needs to. So what I've been doing for both people who have these lower end machines as well as Windows 7 users, and I've been upgrading them to Linux. Either I use the I forget who makes it, but there's a version of Chrome operating system out there that works really good. I'll leave a link in the description because I can't think of the developer right now, but it's free and it works really well. I put it on a couple of different laptops and haven't had any complaints from the users at all. And the other one I use, which is more full functionality, is Mint Linux, which is a version of Ubuntu. But it's got a different skin on it, and it comes with a bunch of really useful apps for people coming from Windows 7. I think this is one of the smoothest transitions to an operating system because it's very similar, and it comes with a lot of the same standard applications, and it's laid out kind of the same way as well. So, but I digress. Windows 10 is actually my favorite operating system as far as Windows goes. And I still use Windows because I run a business, and there's a lot of apps and things that I need that are simply not available on Linux, at least the quality that I'm looking for. I mean, open source is great, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it's nice to pay for software and have good software. What is my dog doing? Dude, chill the fuck out, man. My God, he's just been like here, pawing at me the whole fucking time I'm talking here. Damn, animals are a little ornery. So anyway, to get to my point of this whole fucking story, I've been ranting. My computer crashed yesterday. Like, my video card took a shit. I've been playing video games, Little SimCity, and doing video editing and watching YouTube kind of all at once, and I really taxed the shit out of this thing. And I noticed that the fan had stopped working 100% of the time, and I believe it just overheated, and it froze my computer up, and I couldn't even do a hard shutdown. I unplugged it or switched it off at the power source, and then I couldn't turn it back on again. So I thought it was pretty well dead, and I thought maybe, you know, the motherboard was gone itself. So I brought it into my tech room, which I have over here. Took it all apart, and I have just loads and boatloads of parts, because if you guys remember, we had the miners running in here. So those are not running anymore, and they're all disassembled. This is what's left. We still have this one here, and what I'm using it for now is just basically a test. But so I brought my computer in here yesterday. There's the old card that came out of it, 4GB MSI. I had to use that card because the motherboard was so old that it wouldn't accept anything beyond PCI Express 2.0. So they're like way beyond that now, and a lot of the newer cards were just incompatible. So there's the old board. It's actually a pretty halfway decent board. It's got a really fast 4 gigahertz AMD processor in it. Had 32 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM. I mean, it had a lot of really good components in it, which is kind of a shame that I had to take it apart and basically scrap it. There's a lot of good parts. Like, this board is probably still good. Like I said, the only thing that took a shit was the video card, but you can't get good video cards for this anymore. Like, you can get old video cards, and that's it, and they're getting harder to find older video cards that are still in working order. Like, this one could probably be refurbished if somebody was to put a new fan on it. But the coolest part about this breakdown is I had no idea you could do this. And this is with Windows 10 as far as I'm concerned, because I've been in IT, you know, I was in IT for 6 years. I became certified, Microsoft certified, back when it was Windows XP was the big deal. And so I've been just kind of following everything since then. And if you ever had this happen where your video card went out, and basically what I had to do was pull the motherboard, pull everything, and I took one of the old boards, one of these Asus B250 mining expert boards, and I just used that with one of the old RX580 video cards. And the result was fucking awesome. I was expecting, as you might expect to have to do this, to have to wipe the hard drive and reinstall Windows from scratch. Because anytime in the past when you would try to do this, like if you had like your motherboard fried and you had another board, you swapped everything out, but it's a different motherboard. The hardware access layer is completely not the same. Windows would freak out, and it might not even boot for that matter. But you would almost always have to wipe the hard drive and reinstall Windows to get the drivers correct and make sure everything was compatible. And you know, even if it did work, Windows activation would kick in and be like, hey, you can't just swap motherboards. How do you know this isn't a copy? And it freaks out the activation part of it. And it didn't work back in those days. But yesterday, I did the same thing, pulled that motherboard out, put one identical to this into my PC, and I was like, well, let's just see if it works. You know, it shouldn't, because it never did before. But who knows? Maybe Windows 10 is better. And sure as shit, it worked. I turned it on with my old hard drive, which was an AMD processor. I'm going from basically this DDR3 AMD AM3 processor motherboard to a basically newer generation i7 Intel RX580. So like completely different hardware architecture. There's nothing in the motherboard is the same. The memory's different. The CPU architecture is different. The PCI Express's levels are higher generations, and so like everything was different. I did not expect anything to go smooth. Yet I turned it on. Not only did it boot up, but it didn't even like need any drivers. It had all the drivers that it needed to run this box. And so here we have it now. It's just sitting here. It's running good. I haven't reinstalled anything. This is still, all my old apps are on here. The games work. There's nothing wrong. All the drivers are there. They're signed. The only thing I had an issue with was I forgot that I had disabled the audio controller on the miner, and I didn't have sound, and I couldn't figure out why, but I got it back in the BIOS. But dude, you can just literally swap motherboards in Windows 10, and it actually works. You don't have to reinstall Windows 10, and this is like mind-blowing. Nobody told me this. I didn't know it. You couldn't do it with Windows 7. As far as I know, you can't do it with Windows 8. I haven't tried it. And any previous versions of Windows and any version of Linux that I know of, you can't just swap hardware and expect it to work. Now, I could be wrong. I haven't really tested this on a lot of Linux operating systems. But especially if you're going between AMD and Intel architecture, you really don't expect it to work. So I was actually just very surprised to find that Windows 10 still works without really any configuration, and that's it. So my computer's upgraded. Now I'm running an i7 Intel processor with DDR4 RAM, and everything else is the same, but I do intend to upgrade solid state drives soon to PCI Express interface. So yeah, I just wanted to share that because I found that really, really interesting. So that was kind of my tech tip. Some of you guys are, probably knew this already, but I'm surprised I didn't know it. Windows 10 has been out for, 3 or 4 years now, and I've installed countless operating systems, PCs with Windows 10 when I was working full-time in IT, and never knew about this. It saved me a lot of time. Anyway, saved me a lot of time this time, just testing it out. I'm glad I did. So hopefully that helps you guys. You picked up that tip, and if you have to reinstall, if you think you have to reinstall Windows 10 because you changed hardware, just try it first. Now I will say one thing. Windows 10 was previously installed on that mining board, and it was activated. Now, as far as I know, when you activate Windows, that information is stored somewhere in the BIOS or somewhere in that motherboard because you never have to activate it again. I'm not exactly sure how their activation system works, but once you activate Windows 10 on a motherboard, it stays with that motherboard, and you can reinstall Windows 10 as many times as you need to without having to go back and reactivate it again. It just works. So for those reasons, that's why Windows 10 is definitely my favorite. It's just so freaking easy to deal with as an IT guy or somebody that's configuring it. And, whether you like getting used to it, it's just like, when you compare it to the older Windows operating systems, they were kind of a nightmare back in the 90s. So, even Windows XP, half of the shit that I learned when I got my Microsoft certification is irrelevant now. You just don't need to know it. It just works. There's all kinds of configuration shit you had to do back then that you don't have to do now. So it's kind of crazy. Computers are easy, but they're super complicated. So it's just AI. Anyway, guys, y'all have a great day. This video is getting too long. Peace.